Hello. Let's talk about JavaScript for a different note. I come from a corporate environment. It's a pharmaceutical company here in Prague who just recently decided to develop software in-house, indoors. And this happened 3 years ago by founding an IT innovation center here in Prague, in Branchburg, and in Singapore. Even more recently, 10 months ago, it decided to support its products, which are pills and vaccines, with digital solutions to the actual customers, which means patients and physicians. So, yeah, without further ado, and without even experimenting, we decided to go with React Native. So, no rule of experimenting before going into. We directly jumped into and believed, and we placed a bet on React Native and hoped that it will just work. So let's see how it works out. How we imagined it before was Facebook told us that in React Native you write JavaScript code. This is JavaScript code. Then a magic happens, and suddenly you have a product that works on all platforms, mostly iOS and Android. You can see a bit of a web here and maybe an experiment with Windows. Beautiful. Close, very close. So let's see what environment is required to get it up and running. Of course, you need Node and Node package modules and React, because it's built on top of React. You want to write it in your favorite IDE or text editor. You probably won't be able to transpile the ridiculously bleeding-edge ECMAScript features. You might know where this is heading now. You want to select your favorite test engine and test tools. And in order to be able to run it on an iOS device, you need Xcode developer tools, so MacBook or Mac OS at least. For Android, you need Android SDK. And to experience the full experience with Java, you probably want to have Android Studio for that. Since you want to have end-to-end or UI tests on the mobile devices, you need a tooling, which is Appium and Robot Framework, that allows you to write automated tests on the devices. I don't even know what this is anymore. And yes, ESLint. Don't forget about static code analysis. Right. This was tiring. I needed to put a picture of a puppy to calm down a little, because I'm trembling now, actually. So yeah, you can see, and it was mentioned multiple times tonight, that JavaScript is an environment of a chaos. Imagine you put another chaos of iOS development and Android development underneath, and you get something like this. You get a triangle, a pyramid of chords, where you remove one chord and everything crumbles, but you put another two triangles, pyramids of chords underneath. You can envision it as a Jenga tower built on top of a Jenga tower, but you can imagine every layer built with a single piece, with a single block. Once you actually eventually get everything up and working, you actually have stuff that you're used to in JavaScript. So you have Watchman running unit tests for you. You have hot reload as well, actually. This is actually iOS emulator that has hot reload enabled, and as you write and save code, it hot reloads your components. Beautiful. You get debugging and development tools with it as well, so you can use Redux debugger, Redux logger. You get pretty neat debugging red box inside of the emulator, and you have a nice tool in development mode enabled for your emulator. What it actually is, well, I've heard that many of you are actually familiar with React. How many of you actually tried React Native? Oh, this is pointless then, the whole presentation. Anyway, some of you might resemble React, except instead of divs and spans, you write views, and for text, you need to wrap text into the text component. This might resemble CSS. Yes, it's very similar, and it supports Flex ideology. What's next? Yes, so you've seen Vue. How does it actually work? Upon compile time or run time, the view is actually, for each platform, translated into a native component, which is then displayed to the user. With some tweaking, you might actually get it working on a web as well. Now, there is not only view and text components available out of the box. React Native actually comes with a bunch of components and APIs available for you, most of them for both platforms, but you might notice that some of them are platform-specific. You, for example, have back Android API here for handling the hardware Android button. This is all pretty neatly summed up in a React Native documentation, and yeah, let's keep going. So an example of a native component would be a button, for example. Oh, nice visualization of a button. So this is how you'd basically specify a button. You use native component and React syntax. Right. This is how would you use an API. In this case, it's a geolocation. You simply call some kind of a static method of a library you import from the native React Native library. If you want to write your own modules or components, you can get your hands dirty with Objective-C and Java, because the iOS part of React Native was written on Objective-C for I don't know what reasons. Maybe because Swift was at the time still young and evolving a lot. And yes, so if you want to basically have a native event API available in your JavaScript, you have to write some kind of a magical method, or you have to wrap the native code that handles events into some magical Objective-C method. In Java, I don't even know if you can do this in Java. I wrote this an hour ago, and yeah. Anyway, you don't have to do this necessarily at every time, because the community has been very proactive and productive. And if you go to npm.js.org, you find out that React Native has a pretty wild set of libraries and modules available to you. Some of the highlights or examples would be GA, localization, notifications for both platforms, device info for obtaining information about device, bundle IDs, language localization, location of the user of the device, maybe. And now onto the community developed modules. Well, there's plenty of them. I picked one as a nice showcase. You have this beautiful swiper that you can be used from native or web environment. One of the greatest contributors of React Native is actually Airbnb, because the Airbnb application itself is at least partially written in React Native, and they've done these beautiful Lottie React Native animations, which basically leverage After Effects animation. So your designer can actually design animations in After Effects, Adobe, and you can use them in React, React Native, and natively in iOS and Android as well, actually. Another worth mentioning Airbnb module is React Native Maps. It's pretty cool. They're doing a great job. The most painful native module bundled in the React Native library is navigation, and you might have heard about it. How the native out-of-box navigation works is basically you have a component where you need to wrap everything within your application, where you have a switch which decides which component should be rendered based on which road the user currently is on. You then attach the navigator object into the scene, into the component you want to render as a props. And if you want to then navigate through the application, you have to go like this. Now, if you want to have this as a part of Redux or any other Flux implementation, you probably don't want to do something like this. So registering the navigation object into Redux upon mounting the component, and then navigating through Redux by calling getStateNavigation push. So React developers don't scold me for this, but this is how we do it in our applications. The struggle is imminent because there has been lots of trials of community trying to re-implement how navigation should work in React Native, and they failed miserably 128 times. We probably imagine something like this. You might know this from React router or something. Hopefully, there's a hope in the end of the tunnel, a light, and it's called the reactnavigation.org, which should be a universal navigational component for both React Native and React itself. Enough about modules and navigation. Let's jump into empty slide. Yeah, cool. OK. Platform-specific configuration. So if you actually want to bundle a module that is communicating with native platform or the native part of the application, you have to do some kind of a setup. You have to link the library that is communicating with the native environment in Java, in Android. You have to link it in this package list. There's a magical CLI command that should do this automatically, but if it doesn't work, you have to do some kind of manual labor. Also, React Native doesn't touch the core native parts, such as icons or app names, so you have to configure still these in Xcode or Android XML configuration files. If you want to distinguish your functionality on Android or iOS, you will have to write some platform-specific code distinguished by a simple API that provides you with which platform is your code running on, or you can name your components and files with a suffix specifying on which platform will then this component will be imported from which file. This is pretty cool. So as you can see, a massive traction and popularity has been there since 2015, January, I think. We started to work with React Native on 14th of June last year, and it already has bumped 20 versions above, which is paying every single version release if you want to stay up to date. Just to compare, React has 503,600 issues on GitHub. React Native has almost double, so it's really popular. People like it, and people actually contribute, which is cool. Now, I mentioned we work in a corporate environment, so let's talk a little bit about that. So, to ensure quality and to fulfill the need of delivering a documentation, of course, you have unit tests and React component testing. And lately, you can actually abuse Jest and use snapshot testing, which is a relatively new thing, where you can just let the component render however, and then let the Jest compare it with some kind of a snapshot, which is rendered on the initial run, test run, which creates a JSON representation of your component, which on other runs, it will compare it to. Lately, enzymes started to work together with React Native well, so you can actually use enzyme for unit testing as well. Now, unit testing was not enough for this corporate environment. They needed to have a proof that someone somehow actually went through the application manually or in some other way and ensured that finger pushing or the UI actually works itself. So we introduced Robot and Appium, which allows us to programmatically manipulate with the devices, or at least the emulators. So this is an actual 100% working code written in robot framework syntax. You can see the test case, which is written actually in English, and this test case is then provided as a documentation with a small green tick that the test has passed. You can see some keywords that define what should the Brian open the app do. So the page is waiting for some elements to appear. You can see some platform distinguishment in the swipe down, because swipe doesn't work on both platforms simultaneously. And yeah, now there was a bit of struggle with identifying what to press, what elements to wait for, because React Native is another layer on top of the native part. So we need to provide both test ID for iOS test runs and accessibility label for Android runs, so that this keyword actually works when we run the test on both platforms. Yeah, this allowed us to provide the hungry management people with green results, that someone actually went through the application and tested it. It works. Yeah. Now, how do you feel about this? I do have a mixed feelings of wow, this is really cool. We can write single code base and have it running on both, or even 3 or maybe 4 platforms. And this feeling is combined together with this frustration of the chaos that is around JavaScript community, or JavaScript ecosystem. But it's really beautiful. I've been in this environment for 10 months, and it's been cool. I have a bit of time. Do you want to see some hands-on, maybe? No? Yes? Sure. I have my phone with me here. You should be able to see it here. Yes. Can you see that? Yeah. So my whole life, I just realized, was a lie. Oops. I don't know who that was. But William, my colleague from work and organizer of this event, has just shown me this sketch thingy where you can literally write code in a web browser, connect it with your mobile application. That's my colleague over there. And this is the friend over there. How do I turn this off? I cannot go airplane mode, never mind. I have to scan QR code of this solution, which will basically open this application written in this browser. And as I write the code here, it will automatically bundle the JavaScript package into the native application. So what it actually is, it's a bundled JavaScript code that is injected into the native application and being run on a single thread on the application, which communicates with your native APIs. And this is a sketching tool where you can sketch and try out different components and see how they behave. So maybe we add a button. We don't add a button because you cannot put a button inside of a text, I guess. Yes. So now we have a button. If I press the button, it does exactly what it should do. It should show an alert, button pressed. Magic. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.